where the river runs free. A story of captivity, courage, and the love she never knew was looking for her. So if the sun sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36. She had memorized 114 chapters of prayer. She had prayed them 5 times a day, every day from the time she was 7 years old, on a small prayer rug her grandmother had given her, facing southwest toward Mecca, her lips moving through the familiar Arabic words with the practiced precision of someone who has done something so many times it has become part of the body rather than just the mind. She had prayed through school exams and her mother's illness, and the night her father arranged her marriage, and the morning she met the man she would marry. She had prayed through 4 years of a marriage that was the most isolated, frightening, and lonely experience of her life. She had never, in all of those prayers, felt a single one of them answered, not because she was not devoted. She was. She was more devoted than most of the women around her. She did everything that was required. She did everything that was asked. But the presence she was reaching for was never there when she reached. And she had spent 4 years in a house in Tehran, wondering, in the secret and unexamined place where she kept the thoughts she could not say out loud, whether anyone was listening at all. Her name is Shirin Mahmoudi, and the story of how she went from a prayer rug in Tehran to a pew in Charlotte, North Carolina, is one of the most unexpected journeys a life has ever taken. Before we move forward with the story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help us to grow this channel to uplift more people. She grew up in a home full of light. This is important to say because the story that follows is dark in places, and the darkness is easier to understand when you know what the light looked like before it. Her father, Dariush, was a civil engineer in Tehran, educated, respected, a man who loved poetry and who read to Shirin and her younger sister Nasrin from the great Persian poets before bed. Her mother, Farideh, was warm and capable and ran the household with the organized efficiency of a woman who took genuine pleasure in the quality of her home and her family's life in it. They were observant Muslims, not rigidly so, not in the way that produces fear, but in the way that is woven into culture and identity and the rhythm of a family's week. The call to prayer was the background music of Shirin's childhood. Ramadan was observed with the communal warmth of a family that made the fast a shared thing. The faith was real and present. Shirin was a good student. She loved languages. She had learned English at school and practiced it with a dedication that surprised her teachers. Not because she planned to leave Iran, but because she found the words themselves beautiful, the way the language carried ideas differently from Farsi. She had a small group of close friends. She laughed easily. She was 22 when her father mentioned Reza Karimi. Reza Karimi was 41. He was the business associate of a man her father respected, a successful importer of electronic goods who had a reputation for integrity and for the kind of visible prosperity that communicated stability. He had been married once before, briefly, a union that had ended without the kind of explanation that invited further questions. He came to dinner. He was, that first evening, everything a family hoped for. He was well-spoken, attentive to Shirin's parents, generous in the compliments he paid to the house and the food. He brought sweets, a specific brand from a shop in northern Tehran that was known to be expensive and that communicated the effort of research. He asked Dariush about his work with the kind of intelligent, specific interest that suggested he had done his homework. He looked at Shirin twice. The first look was direct and assessing, the look of a man taking inventory. She noticed it and then told herself she had misread it. The second look was warm, or something that wore warmth as a coat. She told herself she had misread the first one. Her mother liked him. Her father was impressed. The conversations between the two families proceeded over 6 weeks, with the formal, specific progression of an arrangement being made between people who understood how arrangements worked. Shirin was asked once if she had any objection. She was sitting across from her mother when the question was posed. Her mother's face held the expression of a woman who hoped a particular answer would be given. Shirin said she did not have an objection. She was not certain that was true, but the machinery of the arrangement had a momentum that her uncertainty felt inadequate to interrupt, and she loved her parents. And Reza Karimi was educated and prosperous, and had brought the expensive sweets. They married in a ceremony that Shirin wore white to, and that her mother cried at, and that her friends attended and photographed, and that looked from every angle that was visible like the beginning of something good. The first month was the version of Reza Karimi that the dinner had promised. He was attentive. He took her to restaurants. He showed her the apartment he had prepared, a well-furnished space in a good neighborhood, with the pride of a man presenting evidence of his provision. He was also, in ways so small they could be individually dismissed, already drawing the parameters of what her life was going to look like. The comment about the way she wore her hijab in public, too loosely, he said, and it was said as concern. The preference he expressed about which of her friends he thought were appropriate for her to spend time with, framed as observation. The evening she had planned to visit her parents, and he had quietly arranged something else without asking. And when she mentioned the conflict, he had looked at her with a patience that did not feel like patience. She adjusted. This was what she did. She adjusted because adjustment was the tool available to her, and because the cultural architecture of her world provided a framework in which a wife adjusted to her husband's preferences. And this was not remarkable. This was simply how things worked. She adjusted. The parameters tightened. By the end of the first year, the dinner version of Reza Karimi had been fully replaced by the version that had been underneath it. He was controlling in the specific systematic way of a man who understood that control deployed gradually is more durable than control deployed at once. By the time any single restriction was fully visible, it had been preceded by so many smaller ones that it felt like a continuation rather than an escalation. She could not leave the apartment without telling him where she was going and when she would return. She was not permitted to have her phone charged in the bedroom. She was not permitted to contact her family more than twice a week, which became once a week, which became calls monitored from the next room. He had opinions about her appearance that were expressed as corrections, about her cooking, which was never adequate despite her attempts, about the way she arranged the apartment, which she rearranged, and rearranged, trying to find the version he would not find fault with. She could not find it. There was no version. The finding of fault was not about the apartment or the cooking or the hijab. The finding of fault was its own purpose, the mechanism by which he maintained the architecture of her smallness. He had never struck her. This was the thing she told herself. He had never struck her. She used this fact the way you use a landmark. It told her where the boundary was, and as long as they had not crossed it, she told herself they were still somewhere navigable. Then they crossed it. She will not describe it in specific terms. She has described it to the specific people who needed to know, and it is hers to keep or share as she chooses. What she will say is that the morning after it happened, she lay in the bedroom of the well-furnished apartment in the good neighborhood and understood, with the complete clarity that follows certain events, that she was in a situation from which she needed to get out. The question was how. She called her mother. The call was monitored. Reza was in the next room, so she could not say directly what she needed to say. She tried to say it in the spaces between the words. She said she had been having a difficult time. She said she missed home. She said, as plainly as the monitored call allowed, that things were not as they should be. Her mother said that marriage was an adjustment, that every wife had difficult seasons, that Reza came from a good family and had provided a good home, and that Shirin needed to be patient. She called her father. Her father said that what happened between a husband and wife was between them, that he had made an agreement with Reza's family, that she was a married woman now, and that a married woman's home was her husband's home. This was the second collapse, the specific, devastating collapse of the people she had believed were her foundation, not because they were cruel, because they were operating inside the same cultural architecture that had arranged the marriage, and the architecture had no room in it for what she was trying to say. They were not protecting her. They would not protect her. She had to protect herself. The plan took 8 months. 8 months of performing normalcy, of being the wife Reza expected, while the interior of her was doing something entirely different. It was the most demanding performance she had ever given. It required the specific, total self-discipline of a person who understands that the only exit available requires a runway. She had a contact, a woman from her university years, a friend named Parisa, who had married a man who worked in import and export and who had connections that moved across borders. Parisa had known from a single conversation the previous year that things were wrong. She had given Shirin a number. She had said simply, "When you are ready, call this number." Shirin had memorized it. She called it from a market, on a phone she had borrowed from a shopkeeper she trusted, while Reza believed she was selecting vegetables. The plan that followed was not simple. It involved documents and timing and the specific nerve-destroying patience of waiting for the right window in a situation where the wrong moment meant consequences she could not survive. It involved a network of people, mostly women, some men, a chain of trust built across a system that existed because the need for it existed. It involved a Tuesday morning when Reza left for a business meeting that was scheduled to last 3 hours. She had been ready for 6 weeks. She took her documents. She took the money she had accumulated from the household budget in amounts too small to notice over 8 months. She took one bag. She left the apartment. She did not look back. The details of how she crossed from Iran to Turkey, and from Turkey to Germany, and from Germany eventually to the United States are not this story's to tell in full. They belong to the full, complex, dangerous reality of a journey that millions of people have made under various degrees of desperation, and that reality deserves more than a paragraph. What matters for this story is that she arrived. She arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina on a Tuesday morning in March, sponsored through a refugee resettlement organization that connected her with housing and casework support. She arrived with her one bag and her documents and 8 months of accumulated discipline and 4 years of a marriage and 22 years of a life in Tehran. She arrived exhausted, disoriented, free in a way she had never been free before, and terrified in a way she had also never been terrified before, which were the same feeling wearing 2 different faces. She arrived not knowing a single person in the city. She arrived without her parents, who had, when they finally understood that she had left, contacted Reza's family first and Shirin second, and whose message to her, when it came through a cousin who still communicated, had the specific pain of a door closing. She was alone, and she was, for the first time in her life, completely and entirely responsible for what happened next. The resettlement organization placed her in an apartment near East Charlotte, small, furnished in the way of transitional housing, but warm and private, and hers in the specific way that no space had been hers in 4 years. She prayed 5 times a day on the prayer rug she had brought in the one bag, facing southwest, the Arabic words moving through her lips with the practiced precision of 22 years. She prayed in the apartment in Charlotte the same way she had prayed in Tehran, with the same devotion and the same reaching for a presence that was not there when she reached. She was not angry about the absence. She had made peace, in a practical way, with the absence. God, Allah, was what you prayed toward, not what you experienced. That distinction had been present so long it had stopped feeling like a deficiency, and had simply become the definition. She enrolled in an English conversation class through the resettlement organization. She worked at a dry cleaning establishment 6 hours a day. She learned the bus routes. She learned the grocery stores. She built, incrementally, the architecture of a functional life. She was good at building functional architectures. She had practice. The English class met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in a community room at a library on Central Avenue. The instructor was a volunteer named Dr. Linda Foster, retired 70s, with the specific quality of a woman who had decided that her final chapter was going to be genuinely useful. She taught English with the patient precision of a former educator and the warm attentiveness of a person who was interested in the people she was teaching as people, not as students. She noticed Shirin in the 3rd week, not because Shirin was struggling. She was not. Her English was already good and was improving quickly. Linda noticed her because of the specific quality of self-containment she carried. The careful, managed composure of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible and has become very good at it. After the 6th session, she asked Shirin if she would like to have coffee. Shirin said yes. They sat in a coffee shop on Central Avenue, and Linda asked questions in the specific, unhurried way of a woman who was genuinely curious and had no agenda attached to the curiosity. Shirin told her more than she had planned to tell anyone. Not all of it, but the shape of it, Tehran, the marriage, the plan, the crossing. Linda listened without flinching. When Shirin finished, Linda said, "You are one of the most courageous people I have met." Shirin said, "I didn't feel courageous. I felt desperate." Linda said, "I think those are sometimes the same thing." She paused. Then she said something that she offered the way she offered everything, without pressure, simply placing it on the table between them. "Can I tell you about someone? Someone I've known for a long time who I think you might want to meet." Shirin said carefully, "Who?" Linda said, "Jesus." Shirin was quiet for a moment. She said, "I was raised Muslim." Linda said, "I know. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking if you'd be willing to hear something." She looked at her. "You told me that you prayed for 22 years and never felt anyone listening. I want to tell you about a God who listened so much, he came personally." It was not a thing Shirin had heard framed that way before. She said, "Tell me." Linda talked for a long time. She talked about the Jesus of the Bible, not as a prophet, which is how Shirin had always heard him described in the Islamic framework, but as something more specific and more intimate. She talked about the way Jesus spoke to people. The Samaritan woman at the well, the woman caught in shame, the people that the religious structures of his time had marginalized. She talked about love that was not conditional on performance. Love that did not require correct execution of ritual to be present. She said, "The God I know does not stand at a distance requiring correct form. He came close. He comes close. He is close right now." Shirin thought about 22 years of reaching for a presence that was not there when she reached. She thought about the prayer rug in the apartment on Central Avenue, which she went to 5 times a day, and the specific quality of the absence she met there. She said, "How do you know he is close?" Linda said, "Because I have felt him. Not in the way you feel furniture, not a physical thing, in the way you know someone loves you, not from a declaration, from the accumulated evidence of how they treat you." Shirin sat with that. She said, "Can I read about him myself?" Linda said, "I was hoping you'd ask." She reached into her bag. She pulled out a Bible. She said, "Start with the book of John. Read it the way you'd read anything, with your whole attention, not with a conclusion already in place." Shirin took the Bible. She looked at it for a moment. She said, "I have prayed every day of my life and never felt my prayers reach anything." Linda said, "I know, and I can't promise you an explanation for that. What I can tell you is that Jesus said something that I want you to read for yourself." She opened the Bible to John 8:36 and put it in front of her. "Read that." Shirin read, "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." She read it twice. She said, "Free." Linda said, "Free." She read the book of John in 4 days. She read it the way she had once learned English, with complete attention, noting everything, going back to passages that required rereading, sitting with the ones that produced something she couldn't immediately name. She had expected a religious text in the familiar mode, the mode of requirement, of correct form, of distance maintained between the worshipper and the worshipped. She had expected the God she had been praying toward for 22 years, present in a different vocabulary. She did not find that. She found someone who touched people, who wept, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," with the specific, direct confidence of someone who meant it as a personal statement rather than a doctrinal position. She found someone who, when a woman who had been caught in public shame was brought before him to be judged, bent down and wrote in the dirt and said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." And then, when everyone had left, looked at the woman and said, "Neither do I condemn you." She read that passage 3 times. She had spent 4 years in a house where condemnation was the primary language, where she was the object of judgment that was never satisfied, where nothing she did was ever sufficient, where the person with authority over her looked at her and found her wanting. She had also spent 22 years praying toward a God who felt, from the inside of the practice, like a more formal version of the same thing. Required behavior, enforced compliance, the reach toward a presence that evaluated rather than embraced. This person in John was not that. This person bent down in the dirt. This person wept. This person said, "Free indeed." She sat on the floor of the apartment on Central Avenue with the Bible in her lap and felt something she had not felt since the childhood before the marriage. Something that felt like the quality of her father's voice reading Persian poetry before bed. The specific warmth of a presence that was for you rather than over you. She put her face in her hands. She did not pray in Arabic. She said in Farsi in the apartment in Charlotte where no one could hear her, "Are you there? Are you the one she told me about? Because I have been reaching for a very long time, and I would like to know if you are there." She sat in the quiet, and for the first time in 22 years of reaching, something reached back. Not dramatically, not with visible light or audible voice, with the specific quality of presence, the same quality Linda had described, the accumulated evidence of how someone treats you. A warmth that was not the apartment's warmth. A quality of being known that was not the knowing of a judge. She sat there for a long time. Linda took her to Grace Point Seventh-day Adventist Church on a Saturday morning. Pastor Emmanuel Ose was 50 years old, Ghanaian-born, Charlotte by residence, with the specific quality of a man who had carried his faith through enough of his own difficult geography to preach it without abstraction. He preached the way people speak about things they have actually experienced. His sermons were not performances, they were testimonies with structure. The congregation was diverse in the way that some communities of faith are genuinely diverse. Not as a stated value, but as a lived reality, people from many backgrounds occupying the same space with the easy familiarity of people who share something that makes the other differences navigable. Shirin sat beside Linda. She wore her hijab. Nobody looked at it. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody made her feel that it was a problem to be solved before she could be welcome. She was simply welcome. This was, she would later say, the thing that reached her first. Before the sermon, before the music, before anything theological, the simple, unremarkable fact of being in a room and being welcome without qualification. Pastor Ose preached from John 8 that morning. He read verse 36, "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." He said, I want to talk about what freedom actually means in the mouth of Jesus, because freedom is a word that gets used in many ways. Political freedom, economic freedom, cultural freedom, these are real and they matter. But Jesus is describing something that precedes all of them and that persists when all of them are absent. He is describing the interior, the self that can be free inside circumstances that are not free, the person who can stand inside captivity and not be defined by it. He paused. Some of you in this room know what captivity looks like from the inside. You know what it is to be in a situation that took everything from you and to wonder if there was anything left that couldn't be taken. He looked at the room. Jesus says there is. He says the Son can set free what no circumstances can reach. That is the freedom he is offering. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom inside it, freedom that holds. Shirin sat in the pew and felt John 8:36 land in a place that had been waiting for it without knowing it was waiting. Free indeed, not free from the 4 years, not free from the parents who had not protected her, not free from the crossing and the arriving and the rebuilding from nothing in a city where she knew no one. Free inside all of it, free in a way that could not be revoked. She understood for the first time what she had been reaching for in 22 years of prayer. Not compliance, not distance, not the evaluation of correct form, presence. And presence, she was learning, had a name. 6 months after the first Saturday at Grace Point, Shirin Mahmoudi was baptized. She wore white, the same color she had worn to a ceremony in Tehran that had been the beginning of the worst years of her life. She stood in the water in a different country, in a different season of her life, and felt the water close over her and rise around her, and the specific physical reality of something old going under and something new coming up. Pastor Osi said the words. Linda Foster was in the front row, crying with the open, unself-conscious ease of a woman in her 70s who has stopped caring whether people see her cry. After the service, in the fellowship hall, a woman came to Shirin. She was in her 40s, Persian, with the specific quality of composure over something complex that Shirin recognized immediately and from the inside. The woman said in Farsi, "You are Iranian." Shirin said in Farsi, "Yes." The woman said, "I came here 6 years ago." She did not say how. She did not need to. Shirin looked at her. The woman said, "I was not sure about coming today. I have been coming to this church for a year, and I still am not sure about all of it." She paused. "But I saw you in the water, and I thought, if she can, then maybe I can too." Shirin said, "What is your name?" The woman said, "Maryam." Shirin said, "Maryam." She took her hand. "Come have food with me. There is someone I want you to meet." She walked her to the table where Linda Foster was standing. She said, "Linda, this is Maryam. She has been coming to this church for a year, and she has questions." She looked at Maryam. She said, "I'm so glad you're here." She gestured to the chairs beside her. "Sit down. Tell me everything." Shirin watched the beginning of something she recognized. The same coffee shop conversation, the same patient attention, the same placing of something on the table without pressure, the same river finding a new course. She walked to the window of the fellowship hall. Charlotte was doing what Charlotte does in September. The light going golden and the air carrying the first suggestion of autumn. The sky behind the trees, the particular blue that has no adequate name in any language, but that you feel in the same place regardless of what language you grew up in. She thought about the prayer rug in Tehran. She thought about 22 years of reaching. She thought about John 8:36. Free indeed, not from everything, not from the memory of what had been done to her, not from the long work of rebuilding a life from a single bag and a Tuesday morning crossing, but free in the way that holds, in the way that cannot be revoked, in the way that she had been reaching for without knowing what she was reaching for. Through 114 chapters of memorized prayer toward a presence that had, it turned out, been reaching back the entire time from the other direction. It had simply needed a different door, and the door, she was learning, was always open. John 8:36 is a verse spoken by someone who understood captivity. Jesus did not speak these words from the comfort of an unchallenged life. He spoke them as a man who would, not long after, be handed over to a system of power that would put him in the most ultimate of captivities. He knew what he was speaking about. He was not describing a freedom from circumstance. He was describing a freedom that holds inside circumstance, an interior liberation that persists regardless of what the exterior is doing. Shirin's story carries several truths worth naming plainly. The first is about the difference between religion and relationship. She was devoted, she was obedient, she performed every required form with sincerity and consistency for 22 years, and she never felt a presence respond. This is not a statement about Islam as a tradition. It is a statement about Shirin's specific personal experience of reaching for something and not finding it. Many people across many traditions have this experience, and many of them, like Shirin, discover that what they were looking for was not a practice but a person. The second is about the nature of freedom. The freedom Shirin found was not the freedom of a comfortable life. She arrived in Charlotte with one bag and no one who knew her. She rebuilt from the ground up. The freedom was interior, the self that could not be taken, the presence that could not be revoked, the love that did not have conditions attached to it. This is the freedom Jesus described. It does not promise ease. It promises that something in you is held that circumstances cannot reach. The third is about the open door. Shirin's freedom began not with certainty, but with willingness. The willingness to receive a Bible, to read it without a conclusion already in place, to ask, "Are you there?" in an apartment in Charlotte where no one could hear. The door does not require credentials or background or the correct religious history. It requires the asking. And the fourth, the one that Miriam represents at the end of the story, is that the river finds new courses. What was given to Shirin she passed along. What Linda placed on a table in a coffee shop on Central Avenue, Shirin placed at a fellowship hall table 6 months later. The chain continues. The door stays open. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. The freedom is real. The door is open. Anyone can walk through it, from anywhere. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified about more inspirational stories on redemption and hope.